Thank you. I will try to mention Donald Trump at the end if there's enough time, but we'll see how we go. I'm going to try to fly through a lot of things in the interest of time to get some good questions. So today I'm going to share with you some of my research and findings about multiculturalism and ethnic minorities in curriculum in Hong Kong. First, I'll say a bit about my approach to multiculturalism. It's been discussed quite a bit today, especially in the last presentation, but I just want to point to some different approaches and different understandings. Then I'll discuss my recent research project. So a question I've been exploring for some time, and this is a picture of the book Professor Bray mentioned, is what can multicultural education do about stereotypes and about cultural tensions in a society? To answer this question, I would argue that we first need to understand what multiculturalism is and what it means to us. I suggest that there are three basic ways to conceptualize multiculturalism in education. And I don't want to say these are mutually exclusive, but simply slightly different ways to think about it, depending on the issue at hand, depending on practical considerations. So first, there is assimilationism. According to this view, difference is a problem for society that minorities should be adapting to. So the society doesn't need to change, the minorities need to change. And there's an assumption here that society is just and tolerable as it is. Historically, societies have had two versions of this, and I just have an example thinking about culture and language here. Under the first, more historical view, you might say it's ethnocentric or culturally biased, the idea that one culture is better than another in some way, and that's the reason why minorities should be asked to adapt and assimilate. Now people are often less ethnocentric than pragmatic, so we might say just practically Chinese is more popular in Hong Kong than some ethnic minority languages, and for this practical reason, minorities are asked to learn Chinese. In Hong Kong, we know certainly that ethnic minorities are assimilating. They can assimilate, and they do. However, we find some issues around prejudice and stereotyping, as people have mentioned here today. So some people think that ethnic minorities are too different, and some people think that assimilation is not feasible or not practical. The view that societies or cultures cannot mix relies on a clash of civilizations view of the world. And so this is my first time I can mention Donald Trump. Under this view, there are different major cultures. So we have the map that's based on Samuel Huntington's research. We have the Western civilization, the Chinese civilization, and the Islamic civilization, according to this view. And Samuel Huntington has argued that the civilizations are too different to blend harmoniously, that they have different beliefs about humanity, that they develop separately from each other, and they will clash violently if they meet. There may be some evidence to this view that you could think about, but social science tells us a different story about world culture. Taking religion, the view has been suggested that Muslim civilization interferes and clashes with other civilizations, but religion is not simply part of one society or one geographic region. It's not locked into national borders or regional borders. Likewise, with Islam worldwide, we see that there's a spectrum of cultural mixing across the world. There's not isolation or homogeneity across these societies. So these are two very different maps that show spectrums compared to the idea that global diversity is separated from each other. Furthermore, in Hong Kong, we have had diversity in Hong Kong throughout its history. Hong Kong has freedom of religion. Ethnic minorities have lived in Hong Kong for generations, and we can see instances that people are not clashing. We're not rioting here. We're talking nicely with each other, in my experience of this event, for example. So a second approach is the traditional multicultural view. This is the view of society as a salad bowl or an orchestra of diversity. It's diverse within it. It's not a melting pot or a single voice that we're all supposed to communicate in a single voice. So this is James Banks, who our last speaker mentioned. According to this view, we should accept and appreciate differences, realize that prejudice and ignorance harm minority children, and learn to live together in diverse communities and appreciate diversity and individuality. And James Banks has also considered how the educational rights of ethnic minorities are challenged due to a lack of cultural pride and feelings of belonging. But there are problems remaining under this view, which have been mentioned before. From my perspective, we have a challenge when we treat teachers as if they're supposed to be experts on diversity. And I would suggest that no one can be an expert on all of diversity because all communities are dynamic and changing and complex internally. So not all ethnic minorities are grassroots, for example. Not all Muslims are Arabs, although it's often painted this way in education and in media. In fact, in Hong Kong, a lot of Muslims are Chinese Muslims rather than Arab. So there are related challenges for teachers related to understanding the relationship between poverty and ethnicity, how to respect groups that are internally diverse, and how to treat minority students fairly as cultural representatives and as according to how they would want to be treated, which is usually just as normal teenagers or normal children. So a third view would be what I would call an intercultural view. And according to this view, teachers do not have the answers. We don't view cultures in a segregated style, either as good or bad. And teachers should prepare students to deal with practical issues that come up around diversity. Interculturalism reflects intersectionality, and this is the idea that each person is unique when it comes to their individual identity, and that each person has an individual condition of disadvantage and of privileges and advantages. So we are not just ethnic minorities or non-Chinese speakers. There's more to every one of us than our ethnicity or the languages we speak or that we do not speak. We identify and face different circumstances based on such things as gender, ability, immigration status, age, occupation, and so on. The part of Hong Kong local curriculum that focuses on multiculturalism, however we would define it, and I think you could say you can find some echoes of all three of these multicultural perspectives in the curriculum for the subject of liberal studies. Its goals are clearly multicultural, listed here, to enhance students' understandings of themselves, society, nation, and human world, to develop multiple perspectives on contemporary issues in different contexts, to demonstrate respect for evidence, an open mind, and tolerance towards views and values held by other people around them, and an appreciation for the values of different cultures. So in my research, I looked at textbooks because they're often used in new subjects, and liberal studies is a new subject. They're the most commonly used resources, and for most people, they see textbooks as dictionaries or encyclopedias, which are simply objective truth, but it can be more than objective truth. In liberal studies, textbooks are not approved by the Education Bureau because they suggest that teachers should not rely on them for liberal studies. However, related research shows that teachers are relying on textbooks for liberal studies, and this is likely to possibly change in the future because it is a new subject. We also know from other kinds of research that ethnic minority students may feel stereotyped in Hong Kong education, both within and outside liberal studies. So my research looked at how diversity is represented in liberal studies textbooks and recommended supplementary resources. and I'm going to skip a few slides here so I can get to the interesting stuff. We did a qualitative and quantitative analysis. We were looking primarily at ethnic minorities, religious minorities, and any discussions in the textbooks of cultural difference, diversity, and related topics. If we look at this quantitatively, we first found that multiculturalism is a very small part of the textbooks. Any kind of reference, and I would say we used a pretty generous definition. Whenever there was the word culture, the word ethnic, any reference to diversity that was more specific, we looked at that, and we found that in the textbooks that in relevant subjects of liberal studies, about 2 to 10% of textbook coverage focused on something multicultural. And these are just 3 of the 6 modules of liberal studies. So we could say that probably looking at the whole curriculum, all 6 modules, probably less than 5% of the textbooks are saying anything about anything about diversity or multiculturalism. More specifically, most references are very generic and general, simply using those words, not explaining what they might mean and how they're relevant to people's lives. So the italics here give some quotes from the textbooks. There is a focus on ethnic integration. So in italics, you can see here, people from over 120 nationalities live in Chungking mansions. Shanghainese, South Asians, people from Africa. They live in harmony. There's also a focus on non-discrimination. Most references are similar to these. Most ethnic minorities discussed are referred to as grassroots and disadvantaged, so Southeast Asians, domestic helpers, and Africans. They're discussed in sections alongside other disadvantaged groups, which are labeled as new arrivals from China and indigenous inhabitants from new territories. So this is a signaling that we're talking about a special case in society. And some more quotes here. They face disputes and conflicts due to different race, appearance, skin color. So we're not going into what does it mean, what are these different races, what are these different appearances. Very general discussions like you see here. There is little focus on what we could say are non-disadvantaged ethnic minorities. Ethnic minority status is treated as completely homogeneous, and there's no discussion of the intersections of identity, intersections of class, gender, or race. There is one exception here, and this is that there is a focus in the text on Islam and on clash of civilizations. And it's important to consider, even in a conference about ethnic minorities, because Muslims are stereotyped as ethnic minorities, some non-Muslim ethnic minorities are assumed to be Muslims in many societies. So the texts say that clash of civilizations is proven, and they have often a very biased understanding of Islam as against democracy, human rights, and gender equality. And there's a lot of pictures of what we would call bad guy Muslims. So of course, Osama bin Laden, sort of cultural opposites of the Western woman and the Muslim woman, and references to September 11. Even there's some bad guys that I don't even know about that are referenced here. So of course, what I want to say, I disagree with Donald Trump. The vast majority of Muslims are not violent, they're not terroristic, but only one side is being shown here. So just to conclude, to be involved with decision making, to have personal autonomy in society, we need good information. And if information is one-sided, I would question that that's good information. We can't even debate ideas if we only are seeing 2% or not even 2%, 0.2% of a global community, which we also find here in Hong Kong. We also need for any kind of harmony, multicultural appreciation, and tolerance, we can't be afraid of people who look differently than we look. And I'm not sure that we're equipping students to be able to look at people in an open-minded way when the only representations in textbooks or are to problematic cases, poor cases, cases where we should have pity or where we should even have fear. So I'll conclude there, and looking forward to lively discussion.
Thank you, Liz.